So what is influenza? Well, before I get into it, let me just let you know that it's been a while since I've uploaded a video here, and I'm sure you can understand the reason why. The pandemic was very bad. It's still very bad, and I was occupied. I think you can understand. They called it the influence. The influence that you cannot avoid. In 1918, this was during World War I, ships returning from Europe with Indian soldiers, and this is what I think is probably how influenza made it to India, brought soldiers who were sick, and these soldiers returned to their respective homes in different parts of India. Well, what do I think happened? Well, it was a war, and soldiers fought side by side from multiple countries. And I'm sure that some European soldiers fought side by side with their Indian brothers. And without purposefully doing so, the influenza virus of 1917, 18, 19, that pandemic began to spread from the European soldiers to the Indian soldiers. And the Indian soldiers came back home. In India, one of the primary methods of travel to get from one side of the country to the other is to travel by train. And that was a very primary source of travel in the early 1900s and even today in the country, although they do now have airplanes and jets, just like most all the other countries of the world. But in those days, 100 years ago, the train was the primary method. Now imagine being on the train, and imagine a train car that maybe normally only holds or supposed to hold 50 people is now packed tight with 100 people. This is something that happens in India on a fairly regular basis on what they call the second class train travel, first class, second class, so forth. And you know, the country was not a wealthy country at that time, and people just wanted to get from point A to point B. So these soldiers probably sat on their seats, and if there was an extra space, I wouldn't be surprised if somebody else sat next to them. Maybe a family was traveling and they had a little child sit next to the soldier. Who knows what happened? But by the close proximity of people riding the trains, soldiers coming back from war have been exposed to soldiers that they worked with from other countries who were sick, now carried the virus back. And we know by the routes of travel from those days that the ships came into the west side and the south side of the country. And as the soldiers began to travel home, they inadvertently, not purposefully, spread the symptoms that they were probably having, runny nose, cough, fever, to the people around them on the train. As the people around them on the train got off at different stops, they then carried the virus to their respective towns and villages. I'm sure you can imagine how a virus that spreads by respiratory droplets, by aerosol, could spread over the entire country. And it did. They say that it took about 3 months from the time the influenza virus entered the country of India, which is a very large country. 3 months to go from top to bottom. By the end of 3 months, people all over the country had the same symptoms of the influence, or the Bombay fever, as they called it. You know I'm talking about the influenza pandemic of 1917, 18, 19. The influenza pandemic from 100 years ago. I'm not talking to you about what's happening right now in the world today. But those of you who, actually probably every single one of you, it sounds like what I'm describing in a way is what we're experiencing in the world right now. And that's because there are a lot of similarities. So I'm going to continue further in my discussions about the influenza virus and the pandemic and just the virus in general, kind of going through some of the details that I talked about with the other viruses that you've seen me describe prior to this video. And keep your mind's eye open. Keep your mind open to the fact that my descriptions of the influenza virus, the structure of the virus, the proteins, and the other anatomical parts of the virus, how the virus spreads, what the virus does, all of these things, pay attention, because the things that I'm going to be telling you will definitely translate, correlate, correspond to the things that are happening in the world right now. Keep watching, keep learning. Now, what I'm teaching you is no replacement for going to medical school. But what I am teaching you is important things that when you learn and pay attention to them, it'll help you understand and interpret what you're seeing on the news and how to be safe and how to keep making it through this pandemic. This pandemic is going to last a while, in my opinion, at least 2 or 3 years, just like the pandemic from 100 years ago. Keep watching.